Hey friends, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my craft room. I'm grateful to have you here for another video, and I'm excited to share with you a white or off-white poinsettia holiday card. I'm going to be mixing some of the older Christmas products with the new from Pretty Pink Posh, the poinsettia corner stamp set and their coordinating dies. I also have the layered winter wreath stencils, the Happy Holiday shadow dies, and the Eyelet rectangle dies. So those will be the Pretty Pink Posh supplies I'll be using, as well as some confetti later on in the video. But let's start with our stenciling. I have a piece of craft cardstock, and I'm going to start with the A stencil. I could have trimmed this down to 6 by 6 to fit behind my stencil, but it was a scrap piece in my stash, so I just went ahead and put it into my little stencil mat, and I'm using my magnets as my glass board is magnetic to keep it in place. I'm starting with some brown ink and using a blending brush to add in those little sticks and twigs and details of our leaves within the layered wintered wreath stencil set. Once that's completely covered, we'll take a look. I love a stencil reveal, so we'll see the beginning of our wreath details. I'm going to grab the B stencil, which has our little berry images, and for this I'm going to use a red ink. This one is a Lumberjack Plaid from Tim Holtz Distress ink. The first color I used was Cinnamon from scrapbook.com. And I'll bring in a couple greens when I'm done with these berries, also from scrapbook.com. And I'm going to do two different green colors. So I'm going to do a little bit more of detailed stenciling, but not really being too detailed. You'll see what I mean in a minute, because I still have a pretty large blending brush for my greens. But I'm going to start with the lighter color Pear, and I'm going to use my blending brush just to add in the color to the pine needle details. Again, I'm not being very careful. I just wanted a two-color distinction look between my pine needles, and then a darker green for the more holly leaf looking leaves, and that will be the color Succulent. So once I get all of my green details into my background, we'll take a look at the final look of this wreath. I decided not to use stencil paste, which I know is surprising for me with my stencils, but I'm going to bring in some confetti later that I think will bring in that shine that I like to add to my cards. And look how pretty this wreath looks on craft cardstock. I thought about adding in some white in some way, but we're already going to have a lighter color when we bring in our poinsettia images. I die cut the center of the wreath with the largest eyelet rectangle die, and there's these cute little details, the eyelets. So I'm just grabbing a tool that has kind of a brush at the end to help me poke out all of those little pieces from my die as well as my panel. So let's move into stamping. I'm going to be using some off-white, kind of a cream colored cardstock, and I'm just trimming this to fit inside my little Misty. I have my two corner poinsettia stamps, and I'm using a brown ink that is alcohol marker friendly to stamp my poinsettias. And I do stamp them twice because I noticed the first time I stamped it, there wasn't a full coverage, so I stamped it again. That's the great thing about using a Misty with our clear stamps. And now I'm going to use some alcohol markers to color in the images. So for the green, I'm using a combination of GY8, GY5, and GY4 from Ohuhu Honolulu markers. I like the B markers because they have a brush and a nib style tip. For my berry details, I'm using two colors this time. I'm going to use R240 as the darker color and R230 as the lighter color. Now, when it comes to coloring in the poinsettia leaves, I'm doing something a little different. So I want them to look kind of white colored, but I'm using cream cardstock, so more of an off-white color. So I'm using YR148 as the shadow and then YR212 as the midtone. And I don't really have a light because I wanted the light to be pretty much the color of the cardstock. I grabbed the coordinating dies and I die cut out my two images, and I didn't color the center of my poinsettias, as you can see, the flower part. I'm going to do some little bit of details at the end of the card process, so you'll see how I fill those in later. I'm going to continue on with my die cutting to cut my sentiment. I'm using the Happy Holidays shadow dies, but I'm just using the actual words and not the shadows for this sentiment. And I die cut it once out of some kind of cranberry red looking cardstock. And then I cut it out a second time with an adhesive sheet behind the cardstock. So that way I can layer my two words, well, the same word, like my two layers of happy together with adhesive already on it and save myself a step of having to add glue. You have to be very careful with these dies as they are very delicate. So I didn't show the whole process of me slowly peeling them off the adhesive sheet backing, but definitely take your time and make sure that you use a shim if you need to, as it is pretty thick to run through your die cut machine. Once I have my sentiment layered together, we can start putting the card together. I have an A2 piece of a darker brown cardstock, and I'm using some adhesive to adhere my eyelet scalloped wreath background to the center of that darker brown cardstock piece. I really love how it matches the brown of the wreath, so it's just tying in all of these more rich Christmassy colors together. I want my poinsettias to stand up off the card, so I'm using some foam squares to cover the back of my two poinsettia corners. I wasn't really sure how I wanted them to go because it is kind of sad to cover my details from the stenciling, but I wanted it to be more of a subtle background, which is why I didn't use any stencil paste this time. So it's okay that a lot of it is covered. It's still very beautiful and still adds a lot to the background of the card. Next, I'm going to add my sentiment. This time I will grab my liquid adhesive to glue my sentiment down. I definitely could have done 2 layers of adhesive, but I didn't think that all the way through. And I am going to be adhering my sentiment just to the poinsettia images. I didn't really want to have to figure out how to add foam behind these little dainty letters, which is why I love that they come with a shadow die, so that way it's a lot easier to glue or pop up these sentiments to your projects. So I'm only adding liquid adhesive behind the sentiments where it will overlap my stamped images. I'm doing my best to get it centered and straight, trying to use my grid on my glass board to help with that. And I went ahead and just added the happy. Again, I only added liquid adhesive to where it overlapped with the pictures. And then I repeated that same process with holidays. Once I have those down, the tittle of the eye isn't exactly on anything elevated with foam adhesive, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to glue it directly down to that craft cardstock. I didn't want to have to, die cut a bunch of little dots out, so it isn't on the same, I guess you could say, height level as the rest of my sentiment, but it's there and you can see it. I'll go ahead and add this to a card base. This is an A2 card base. It's a side folding and it's just rotated, so it will be a horizontal or landscape card. And now I'm going to add in some final details. I absolutely love the matte confetti mixes, and this one is matte gold, and I'm just using a jewel pickup stick to place down the sequins around my card. I end up going kind of in a diagonal across that opening between my two images, and once I have enough placed down, I just use my pickup stick and liquid adhesive to glue them down. Now for the center of my poinsettias, I'm just using a scrapbook.com pops of color in a champagne glitter and adding that to the flowers, the centers of those poinsettias to, I guess you could say, color them in, but also give them some shine, and I think it complements the colors really well on the card. Here's a final look at this Happy Holidays poinsettia wreath Christmas card. I hope you enjoyed today's process and you found it inspirational and that you are creating as we're getting closer to the end of the year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!